Hi, and welcome to the Heart of a Perfectionist podcast. I'm your host, Tegan Thompson. I'm a book lover, a chocoholic, and an INTJ living in a world filled with extroverts. I made this podcast to share my experiences and struggles as an introverted perfectionist, and to bring the inner workings of an introvert's mind to introverts and extroverts alike. So grab a cup of tea and get comfortable. It's time to unmute. Hello everyone, and welcome to another episode of the Heart of a Perfectionist podcast. I hope everyone had a great week and you're enjoying your weekend. So this week we will be talking about how suppressing your emotions has a harmful impact on your mind and your body. And this topic is kind of really important to me and kind of close to me because I know a lot of people personally in my life, and also I do this as well, who struggle with expressing their emotions. And I know that in society today it's kind of like, oh, it's okay if you do that, like it's fine, like what's wrong with that? Well, I'm here to tell you that there are negative impacts to doing that, and so I just kind of want to talk about the harms of kind of hiding your emotions and bottling it up, and why it's important to be emotionally vulnerable. So why do people hide their emotions? And there's lots of reasons for this, obviously. I'm going to talk about kind of 3 big reasons. But obviously lots of people are going to have their own reasons for it, and having a conversation, an open conversation with people about why they feel like they need to hide their emotions or why they feel like they can't express their emotions is a really great place to start, and kind of just unpacking what has caused them to kind of get to this place of repressing all the emotions they feel. So one of the first big reasons why people hide their emotions is because they usually want to avoid showing weakness. And weakness is in quotes because it's a misperception that you being vulnerable and sharing how you feel is a weakness. In society, especially among the male population, there's kind of been this misunderstanding that showing your emotion and sharing your feelings with people is equivalent to vulnerability and being weak, both mentally and physically. And while it's very, very dominant in the male population, it is also very dominant in female population, because if you're too open about your feelings, then you can be too much, and as a woman, and then as a man, if you share your feelings, it's like, oh, that's weird, why are you doing that? Men don't talk about their feelings, men don't cry. And it's actually a really unhealthy belief that society has, and I hope that we can kind of work on breaking that. So a lot of this comes from a fear of being judged by other people, kind of along with what I just said, like, oh, if I share my emotions, am I going to be viewed as weak? And people don't like to be viewed as weak. They want to be viewed as strong, whether that's physically or mentally or whatever they're good at. They don't want to be viewed as weak. And a lot of the times when people share their emotions and share their feelings, they are viewed as weak. But I think it's actually quite a strong trait for people who are able to be open about their emotions and kind of just share it with other people, because you are okay being in a vulnerable place, And that is really hard for a lot of people. So, like, great job to everyone who is able to do that. There are so many people who either are working on that or have just decided they don't need to do that. So, yeah. And then also, people have a fear of other people using their feelings against them. And I know that this has happened to a lot of people. It's happened to me. You like share your feelings and your emotions about something, and then later on they're gonna use it against you, and you kind of get really hurt by that. Like, I was willing to be open and honest with you about something, and you just kind of throwing it back in my face, and that really hurts. First thing I want to say to that is no one deserves that at all. Personally, if someone is willing to do that to you, I think you might want to really take a look at how valuable this person is in your life, and if they are worth keeping around. Because if they're willing to hurt you like that, then I don't believe them to be a true friend or someone you should be close with. So always keep that in mind. But yeah, no one deserves to be put in a position like that, especially when you've gotten to a comfort level where you do feel like you can be open with them. And I know that when people do that, it kind of sets a precedent then for everything that you do in the future, right? So someone hurt me in the past. Well, I don't want to be hurt again, so I'm not going to give anyone the opportunity to do that to me again. So they kind of just shut down and won't open up to many people in the future. So it's also why it's really important to be aware of how you react to other people's emotions when they are honest and open with you, and what you do with those emotions that they've shared with you, because it could potentially impact how they kind of talk about and or don't ever talk about their emotions again. And so it's really, really important to realize that what you do and what you say around people can impact them for a very long time. The second big reason why people hide their emotions is because they often want to avoid conflict. And this one is another... I wish I could say it's a misconception, but it's not entirely, because I know that, there have been times where I open up and I express my emotions and it results in a really big conflict that I never wanted. But yeah, so, there's this fear that when you do open up to others and you express your emotions, that the people that you have opened up to will react negatively to your expression of your emotions. And this has happened to me multiple times, where I decided that I wanted to just be honest with them right out of the gate and not hold it in, because I knew that could potentially cause longer and more intense issues in the future that I didn't want. So I thought I'd just address it right away, and hopefully resolve it. And then what happens is that I get not necessarily attacked, but it feels like I was attacked, and like told that my emotions are invalid to them, like, oh, well, you don't need to feel that way because blah, 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 right? And that's really, really hard, because like, you just wanted to express how you feel, and then it starts a whole argument or whatever, and it just doesn't make sense sometimes. And so that does make people want to close off, because it's like, well, I don't want conflict, I don't want arguments. And, a lot of this stems from a lack of trust in yourself and in other people. Because if your emotions have previously been manipulated and told are invalid, then you're kind of gonna believe, like I mentioned before, like that everyone is kind of gonna do that in the future, and so you're just gonna close off and you're not gonna open up to them also. Because you're afraid that it's gonna result in the exact same thing that happened before, and you don't want that. And it's understandable, and unfortunately it happens quite often. And I think it's important to recognize that when people tell you how your actions or your words made them feel, you don't need to feel personally attacked. And I know I say that, it's not as easy as it sounds, but I think it's important to at least recognize that and kind of process it. I'm still working on it myself. But, when someone's being open with you and telling you how something you've done or said makes them feel, they want you to know that so that you can be more aware of how you act or how you say things in the future, and to potentially change that around them so you don't cause those feelings anymore. If they are negative feelings. Maybe they're positive feelings and they want you to do something more often. I don't know. But you don't need to take those things personally, right? They want to be open and honest with you so that you can build a stronger relationship together. And if you take it too personally and you think, oh, well, they don't like me, or they don't think I'm good enough, and then you start hurting them in return, you're causing a big conflict that doesn't need to happen. Whereas if you just kind of reflect on what they said and say, okay, maybe what I did do or what I did say was hurtful or insensitive, and then just being more aware of it in the future, or having a conversation with that person about why what you did or said made them feel that way. Just so that you can get a whole picture and you're not taking everything from only your perspective. Also, I want to say that everyone's feelings are valid and everyone should be able to express them. And so creating a safe and comfortable environment for the people you care about to be able to come to you and express those feelings is really, really important for building a relationship with someone, and kind of just having those open dialogues that are necessary in a friendship or a familial relationship or a romantic relationship, whatever it may be. And then the third big thing for why people hide their emotions is because they have a lack of confidence in being able to express their emotions. This usually happens when kids grow up hearing that their opinions or their feelings don't matter, and then they are usually judged or criticized for expressing their feelings or their opinions. And this often results in them hiding their feelings from a really early age, just because, they're told that what they say, it doesn't matter, so why should you say it? They're not going to then, right? This is also seen when parents or other adults that are kind of significant in a child's life mask their own emotions. If they're not open or emotionally vulnerable, you're kind of going to see the same result. And it kind of reinforces that the kids should do the same thing and hide their own emotions. And so when kids hide their emotions early on, from a really young age, they never learn or develop the skill of expressing their emotions. And so, as I talked about in my previous episode on emotional intelligence, their ability to communicate and that aspect of emotional intelligence is underdeveloped. And so they're going to have a lack of confidence when it comes to explaining how they feel. And so they might just not do it because That's how they grew up. They grew up learning that they don't need to, or they shouldn't say how they feel, and that is just kind of normal to them. But again, I want everyone to know that everyone's feelings and emotions are valid and they are important to voice, because if you don't voice how you feel, if you don't voice your emotions, if you don't voice your opinions, then you're never going to have a say in your relationships or in your work life, and just how things are done around you. And you kind of have to be okay with just what happens around you, because when you don't voice your opinions and your emotions, then they're never going to get taken into consideration. And the biggest thing with this is that you break that cycle. If you grew up this way, it's really important to break that cycle and to take responsibility for your emotional intelligence and your inability to really communicate your emotions, and learn how to do it, whether that be through research online or practicing in real life or going to therapy, however you want to do it. It's really, really important to take responsibility, because you can sit your whole life and blame your parents, you can blame your family members, you can blame your teachers, whoever you want to blame. You can blame them all you want, but at some point you have to take responsibility for the fact that you're at an age or a point in your life where you do realize what you're doing isn't healthy, and kind of owning up to that and owning up to what you do and how you express your emotions, so that you can learn a healthier way to do it and engage in healthier relationships. So those are kind of the big reasons why people hide their emotions, and some negative effects of hiding your emotions. I want to talk about these because they're really big and kind of surprising, to be honest. So the first thing is ineffective communication, and this one is kind of obvious, right? If you don't express how you feel, you prevent clear communication happening between you and your family member, you and your friend, you and your partner, you and your coworker, whoever it may be, right? There isn't going to be that clear communication, because they're not ever going to know how you truly feel about something. And if you don't express that, then they kind of have to make an assumption, and it just kind of goes downhill from there. And also, when you don't express how you feel, you can prevent solutions happening, right? So if you have a problem, or if you have an issue or conflict, and you don't express your emotions in that conflict, then you could potentially never reach a solution. And when you never reach a solution, most often what happens is the problem kind of just gets left where it was at, and it just sits there, and either you just move on with the person you had the conflict with and just pretend like it didn't happen, or you stop talking to the person, or you just kind of start avoiding it altogether. And what ultimately will happen is that you will see very similar conflicts and problems occurring throughout your life. And so, if you have like a conflict with one person about the way they treat you, but you can never express, or you don't express how you feel about it, and you kind of just ignore it and you move on with life, then the next person who does the same thing to you and you're unable to express it to them, you're going to have this same conflict happening over and over and over again with all the people you meet in your life. So it's really important to learn how to express those things, express your emotions and express your feelings, so that you can create solutions and resolve the conflicts that you have. So with that, you can also have relationship strain, where, people close to you, when you are really, really close to someone and you hang out with them often or something, they usually know when something is bothering you or if something isn't sitting right with you, right? Even if you don't personally say it. The problem with that is if they confront you about it, or if you never say anything, and they don't truly know how you're actually feeling because you want to hide your emotions and kind of just avoid it, then it kind of can lead to a lack of trust, both ways essentially, because the person trying to understand how you're feeling isn't going to know how you're feeling, and then they're going to think, well, you don't trust me enough to open up to me and be vulnerable with me, and so they can't trust you when it comes to your emotions, because they're going to have to make assumptions on how you feel, and then you're not going to trust them because they're never really going to know how you feel, and that's going to be seen. And so you're going to be like, well, they never know how I feel, so I can't trust them when it comes to stuff like that. And so it just kind of creates this lack of trust, and then a lot of strain on your relationship. And like I mentioned before, either you eventually ignore the conflict and just leave it where it was at, or you stop talking to them, or you avoid them, or whatever, which would ultimately mean that you lose that relationship and that connection with that person, which is really, really hard, and something you want to avoid, right? If it's someone that means a lot to you. Another negative effect is emotional buildup. And you've probably heard this one before, where when you hold in your emotions, you intensify those emotions, right? Because you never address those emotions and you never resolve those emotions. So they kind of just sit inside of you and stir and grow. And that can cause a lot of stress and weight on you personally when you have those really, really strong emotions and you don't express them. It's really hard to be around the person or the situation when you don't explain how you feel, because you're just always going to feel that way then, and they're not going to know it. And that just kind of causes its own kind of internal conflict and eventually an external conflict when the person realizes there is something wrong between you two, but they don't know what it is. Emotional buildup can be very harmful to you and the other person, because again, it can cause you personally stress, and then eventually buildups get so big that they just kind of release on their own. And when they get to that point, usually you don't control how they are released, and you can say things or do things that hurt other people, and that's not very healthy, and can again cause you to lose relationships and connections with people who you really cared about. And then in general, hiding your emotions can lead to negative health problems. So in the short term, when you hide your emotions and they build up, you can cause stress, you can cause an increase in your blood pressure, you can cause a decrease in your memory, and a decrease in your self-esteem, which is really hard on a person, that's your self-esteem is really, really important in how you see yourself and how you hold yourself and how you act in certain situations and around people. And when your self-esteem is decreased, then that kind of goes out the window. And with stress, it's really hard on people, especially when people have so many stressors already in their life. And then in the long term, hiding your emotions can increase your risk of diabetes, heart disease, anxiety, and depression. And it can also increase your chances of a premature death by 30%. And this is a statistic from a Harvard study, actually. And this really surprised me because I guess I never really considered that, holding in and hiding your emotions could lead to such negative effects that essentially you could die earlier than expected because of it. So I thought, that it's not an exciting thing to hear, and it might be a really hard thing for some people to hear. But I thought it would be a really important thing to share so that you can be aware that, I know there's a lot of people out there saying, what's the worst that can happen with me hiding my emotions, right? Like, what is the worst? Well, this could be the worst for you, essentially, and that is really, really hard. So I just want everyone to be aware of that. So how can you increase your emotional vulnerability? How can you work on that? And I think it is something really important to work on, because aside from all the negative effects I just listed, when you bottle up your own emotions, you are denying your own experience. And sometimes people don't think of it that way, but when you don't share with other people how you're feeling or how something affected you, essentially you're kind of invalidating your own experience, your own self, and your own emotions. And that's harmful. It's very harmful to yourself, because your emotions are valid and your experience is valid. And it's important to share those things with people so that you can always be taken into account for solutions and for how relationships are built and stuff like that. So it's really important to acknowledge the emotions you are feeling, whether that be internally or externally, right? If you want to figure it out on your own by processing it in your mind or journaling or meditating, however you want to do that, or externally by talking with someone you trust and kind of having that open dialogue and figuring out how you feel, why you feel it, asking yourself questions. Why am I feeling this way? What is the root cause of these emotions? What is my root emotion, right? Sometimes we feel angry and we express it in an angry way, but ultimately we're sad about a situation. And that's a very common thing, is to hide a primary emotion with a secondary emotion. And then you want to confront the person or the situation triggering these emotions, if you can, without blaming. And I say this because once you blame, you're going to start a whole conflict. You want to do it from an outside observer perspective, right? You want to be unbiased. You want to look at every aspect of the situation, at every person's perspective, and recognize that, again, everyone's feelings are valid. Everyone's had their own experience with it, and so it's important to recognize all of those. And then also, if you are having a conversation about it, to use I statements. I know that might feel really childish for some people, but I statements are really important, because when you use I statements, you're not blaming anyone, you're taking responsibility for how you feel. So I statements can be things like, I feel blah blah blah, I don't know, like I feel hurt when this happened, or I want a more, I don't know, I want a safer environment to be able to talk about these things, or I don't like it when you do this, right? So taking responsibility for the way you feel and the way you want things, and not putting it on someone else, right? And then ultimately just taking responsibility for your previous and your current and your future emotions and actions and responses to the emotions you felt. And just recognizing that, sometimes you mess up in the past. You've done things that you realize are unhealthy and you shouldn't have handled it that way. And just ultimately taking responsibility, because when you take responsibility, then you recognize you did play a part in it, no matter what the situation was. Everyone has a role in it. And so you don't get to be the one person who was blameless and everything. So everyone has a role and a responsibility when a conflict occurs. And then lastly, just self-care, making sure that mentally you're taking care of yourself, physically you're taking care of yourself, however you may want that to be. So yeah, that is what I have for this episode. So thank you so much for listening to this week's episode of the Heart of a Perfectionist podcast. If you enjoyed this episode, or if you learned anything new, please go share it with a friend. And as always, have a good weekend, and I will look forward to seeing you guys again next week on the Heart of a Perfectionist podcast. Wow.